Hey guys, tonight we travel far, far away, both in time and in place. The stars are wide above you, scattered across a sky with no electric light to dull them. There's a warm, dry wind brushing against your face as you trudge through the golden dust of the Sahara. You're arriving in a city whose very name once sparked imaginations from Europe to the Middle East.
Timbuktu.
A place whispered about in merchant caravans, rumored to hold more books than many medieval kings could dream of. Your feet ache, but your hands are full. You're carrying scrolls wrapped in goatskin, your own small offering to the legendary libraries of the city. The air smells of firewood, dry paper, and something spiced. Maybe tea steeping in one of the many courtyards that ripple with quiet conversation.
And yet, don't be fooled.
You might have survived the journey here, but you probably won't survive a debate about proper footnote placement in a 13th century Malian treatise on astronomy.
These scholars? They don't play around.
So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love to know, where are you listening from, and what time is it there? Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You pass through Timbuktu's gates just as the call to prayer echoes over the rooftops.
It rolls gently over you like a warm tide.
You're not here to conquer or convert, just to observe.
To wander.
Maybe even to get lost between the stacks of books and winding alleys of a city where silence sometimes feels more sacred than speech. The city itself is flat and low, built in sun-baked mud brick, and it hums with an understated confidence. Not the shouting kind of power, but the kind that knows it has endured sandstorms, dynasties, and debates about the exact phrasing of 800-year-old philosophical riddles.
You feel your shoulders losen slichtly as you pass under an archdoorway. Everything's los.
Children play with palm fronds in the street. A camel chews something it probably shouldn't. Somewhere in the distance, someone is singing. Not a song with verses exactly, just a rise and fall of syllables. You wonder if it's poetry or prayer. The first thing you notice is how many people are carrying books. Not scrolls for decoration or leather-bound volumes to show off, but well-used texts with creased corners and marginal notes scribbled in careful Arabic calligraphy. And they're not just carrying them, they're discussing them, trading them, even reading them out loud while waiting in line for bread. You overhear two young men arguing, quietly, but with fire in their eyes. One insists that Ibn Khaldun's cyclical theory of history can't possibly apply to the empires south of the Sahara. The other smirks, quoting from a dog-eared commentary tucked under his arm. You don't understand every word, but you understand enough. Historians still argue whether the libraries of Timbuktu were as large or as grand as those in Baghdad or Alexandria, but to the people here, that debate misses the point entirely. Knowledge, for them, is not something you hoard in towers. It's something you walk with.
So meeting you live.
You're led down a narrow path between high mud walls, into a small courtyard shaded by a neem tree. There, an elder sits cross-legged, surrounded by three boys and one very sleepy-looking girl, all of them reciting verses from memory. The elder's finger traces the script in front of him, inked so finely that the letters look like they're whispering to each other. You sit, awkwardly, just outside the circle.
No one seems to mind. The girl stiefles Ayon.
You do too. Eventually, the elder looks up and smiles, as if he's been expecting you all along. He nods toward the opposite archway. Go, he says simply, you'll find what you're looking for. And with that, you rise and follow a winding path that leads you deeper into the heart of the city, where scrolls breathe dust and wisdom hides in the folds of manuscripts that haven't seen the sun in centuries. The buildings are quieter here.
De walls taller.
You pass by a carved wooden door where someone has etched a symbol that looks vaguely like a book, or maybe a bird.
A cat watches you from the shadow. It blinks, unimpressed.
You turn a corner and stop. In front of you stands a structure that seems to lean into time itself.
The Gingerabber Mosque.
You've heard of it, of course. It's the ancient epicenter of learning, built from limestone and mud. Its towers rise not with sharp angles, but with the soft sloping grace of sandcastles left too long in the sun. A line of men in long robes, white and gold, shuffle silently into the prayer hall.
None of them speak.
One carries a stack of books so worn they look more like folded cloth. You follow at a respectful distance, your bare feet sinking slightly into the packed earth floor.
Inside, it's cool.
Not just in temperature, but in spirit.
Cool like shadow after noon heat. Cool like whispering voice in our stone chamber, echoing softly against knowledge to all to rush.
Someone gestures for you to sit.
You Donnerstag your Kneskrieg. It's fine.
You're not here to sprint, you're here to soak. As the sun dips behind the mosque walls, the air turns golden.
A boy lights a small oil lamp.
Its flame wavers gently, casting moving shadows across the carved wooden beams above. You hear the rustle of pages being turned.
Someone sneezes. Another softly murmurs what sounds like a passage on geometry.
It is, perhaps, the quietest place you've ever been that's still full of people. And the journey has only just begun. Or maybe both, a book that flies, or a bird that remembers. In Timbuktu, symbols tend to stretch meaning like well-worn leather, layered, intentional, quietly poetic. You step through a low doorway into one of the city's most revered spaces, the home of a scholar.
Not a palace. Not a cathedral. Just a modest, sunlit room where books outnumber chairs 10 to 1.
There are no shelves, only tiers of wooden planks along the walls, stacked high with hand-bound volumes, many wrapped in soft cloth, some nestled under small stones to keep their pages from curling in the heat. You've heard of these scholars, guardians of knowledge, advisors to sultans, authors of treaties and fierce debaters. But standing here, you see something different.
A kind of gentle chaos. A humming of the mind.
You try not to sneeze as you pass a stack dusted lightly with red Saharan grit. At the center of the room, seated with legs tucked under, is a man in layered robes the color of dates. His beard is long, his fingers ink-stained, and his face unreadable, except for the eyes, which twinkle as he gestures for you to sit. You lower yourself onto a worn cushion, hoping you don't knock over a priceless commentary on lunar eclipses.
He doesn't speak right away.
Instead, he reaches for a bundle of parchment bound with a strip of leather. Slowly, methodically, he unwraps it, revealing a manuscript so old the pages look soft as petals. It's written in a mix of Arabic, Songhai, and something you can't quite place. Every margin is filled with notes, some faded, others fresh. This, he says quietly, belonged to my grandfather's grandfather. He wrote his dreams in the margins.
You blink.
He means literal dreams. Little midnight visions recorded beside mathematical proofs and medicinal recipes.
Was that common? You whisper. The man shrugs.
Some scholars believed the night mind was closer to God. Others thought it just helped with memorization. He smiles faintly. Historians still argue whether dream annotations had any scholarly merit. You nod as if that clears things up.
It absolutely does not.
A young boy enters the room balancing a tray of tiny ceramic cups filled with sweet tea, nearly overflowing. He offers you one and places another at the scholar's side. The boy bows slightly, then disappears just as quietly. As you sip, the scholar begins to speak, not in lecture, but in story. He tells you about the great scholars of Timbuktu, Ahmad Baba, who famously owned over 1,600 books during a time when most Europeans were still struggling to read. He tells you about Fatima al-Fihri, whose influence reached even this far south through stories passed on by caravan traders. He mentions debates that lasted years, whether God's knowledge exists outside time, or whether time itself is simply a divine metaphor. You are, at this point, absolutely out of your depth. But you nod respectfully and pretend to understand the implications of metaphysical temporality. The scholar seems pleased either way. Outside, the sun has shifted. The light through the carved wooden windows now dances across the walls, making the script seem alive, each curl and loop of the letters like a breath mid-sentence. The scholar taps the manuscript gently.
You must understand, he says.
To read was sacred. But to preserve what was read? That was devotion.
He rises and beckons you toward another room. A deeper chamber, darker, cooler.
You follow, your footsteps muffled by woven mats. This chamber is quieter still. Here, the manuscripts are not for daily reading. These are the elder texts, the ones wrapped in silk, sealed in carved boxes, and stored well above ground to keep them safe from the twin dangers of flood and careless fingers. You see one box marked only with a symbol, an open eye. The scholar touches it but does not open it. Some books, he says, are only read once a generation.
When the stars align. When the question returns.
You don't ask what the question is. You have a feeling the answer would involve 5 hours of slow citation. There's something else in this room too. A small shelf lined with objects, a broken astrolabe, a carved wooden stylus, a feather once used to dust pages. Relics of scholarly life, preserved with quiet reverence. These, the scholar says, belong to the golden scholars.
You've heard the phrase, of course.
Not because it appears in any textbook, but because it's whispered by camel drivers and tea vendors.
The golden scholars.
The ones who shone so brightly, their knowledge still casts shadows. They weren't just religious clerics or royal advisors. They were astronomers who calculated prayer times by moonlight. Physicians who mixed remedies from desert herbs. Poets who debated the moral meaning of metaphors. Women too, though they're harder to trace in the written record, their voices live on in the footnotes. And yes, footnotes mattered. Some scholars would go so far as to sleep with a new manuscript under their pillow, hoping for divine dreams of context. It was said you could tell the quality of a scholar not by how many books they read, but how many margins they filled. The scholar smiles and gently closes the door behind you.
Back outside, the sun dips lower.
You find yourself in the courtyard again, the neem tree's shadow stretching long. A cat snoozes near a stack of philosophy texts like it's absorbing wisdom by osmosis. You sit. You sip the last of your tea. And you wonder, how many debates, how many stories, how many dreams have these pages held?
You might never know.
But here in Timbuktu, that's half the magic. And tea vendors, passed between generations like a lullaby or a secret password. The golden scholars, they say, were not the richest nor the most famous, but the ones who practiced their learning with the most care, the most ritual, the most poetry. You're not sure if they were real or simply mythologized echoes of the scholarly class, but standing here, you feel their presence anyway, like the lingering warmth of an extinguished candle. The scholar steps aside, allowing you to browse. You hesitate at first, unwilling to disrupt the serenity of the room. But curiosity, that ancient tug, wins out. You reach for a slim volume, its cover a pale, worn leather that smells faintly of smoke and mint. Inside, the ink is deep brown, perhaps from walnut shells or burnt date pits, and the script flows like water down a gentle hill. The text is a treatise on medicinal herbs from the inner Niger Delta, but halfway through, it takes an unexpected turn, a meditation on why certain scents trigger memory more than others. You blink. Did a 14th century herbalist just preempt modern neuroscience? Historians still argue whether Timbuktu's healers were truly scientists, or if they were simply mystics with excellent observation skills. Either way, they recorded everything, from fever remedies involving ground baobab bark to notes on why one should never harvest plants during an eclipse. You flip to the final page and find a sketch of a hand holding a flower, fingers labeled not with anatomical terms, but virtues, patience, precision, praise. Just behind you, the scholar hums a tune under his breath. Something old, tuneless by modern standards, but gentle, something you could fall asleep to. He notices your interest in the flower diagram and chuckles. They believed copying a book required 3 things, he says, raising a finger for each.
Clean hands. A calm mind.
And a heart that doesn't rush. It's not exactly the motto of modern academia, but it has a certain tranquility to it. You ask if copying was ever punished, if someone could be fined or even jailed for errors. The scholar raises an eyebrow.
No.
But, he says, a poor copyist might be exiled, from the libraries, from study. And that was worse. You try to imagine a society where banishment from the library is considered a fate worse than exile from the city. You nod solemnly, pretending not to feel personally attacked by the memory of every overdue book you've ever returned. The scholar motions you toward a final manuscript, this one housed in an intricately carved wooden tube, sealed with a red wax crest in the shape of a fish. He breaks the seal carefully, reverently, then unfurls a scroll-covered edge to edge in microscopic writing. It's a calendar, no, a ritual schedule, for the libraries of Timbuktu. Every scholar, he explains, had a rotation.
Dawn reading. Midday review. Sunse transcription.
You study the list. Tuesdays were for mathematical texts. Thursdays for astronomy. Sundays were silent, reserved for contemplation only. And every month had a designated wind day, where all manuscripts were aired to prevent mold, fanned gently with woven palm leaves. The absurd specificity of it makes you smile.
The gentleness of the care.
Like putting your books to bed. Some believed, the scholar adds, that on wind day, manuscripts could whisper to each other.
Tret ideas trug se breze.
You're about to scoff, but then remember you're in a room where books have dreams in the margins. So you nod instead, respectfully. Whispering books seem entirely reasonable now. He unrolls the scroll further. There are notes on ink mixing techniques, rules for resolving disputes over conflicting translations, and, oddly, a chart comparing the best times to drink various types of tea depending on the topic being read. Apparently, philosophy pairs best with jasmine.
Astronomy with mint.
Law with bitter leaf tea, to keep the mind sharp and the ego humble. You imagine a quiet debate circle, cloaked scholars arguing under the stars about the finer points of land ownership, all sipping the intellectual equivalent of a sour espresso. It tracks. The scholar yawns, deliberately, perhaps as a cue for you to relax.
You Donnerstag you lean back slichtly. Your Spine against the cool Plasterwall.
The room is dimmer now, lit only by golden dust swirling in the last shafts of afternoon light. He says something almost too soft to hear. What was that? You ask. He repeats it, a library, he says, is not a place. It is a practice. You let that sink in. The idea that these rituals, the precise timing, the copying with patience, the tea, the airing, the whispers, are what made Timbuktu's libraries endure.
Not the buildings.
Not even the books.
But the care.
You're about to ask another question, but the boy from earlier reappears, carrying a bundle of clean cloth and a small jar of what looks like oil.
Preservation Auer, the Scholar murmurs.
The boy begins gently wiping the covers of the books, massaging the leather with oil to keep it supple. He works in silence, his touch as gentle as a caretaker tending to an elder's face.
You close your eyes. Not in sleep yet, but in appreciation. In stillness.
And somewhere behind your eyelids, a question stirs, the kind that only comes when you've been quiet long enough to notice it.
Sink in for a moment.
A library is not a place.
It is a practice. You let your gaze wander across the quiet room again.
The books do not move. The shelves do not speak. But the stillness is not empty, it's full. Like holding your breath underwater and realizing the silence is alive with pressure. So what did it mean to practice library? To you, it's always been about buildings, desks, Dewey Decimals you never understood. But here in Timbuktu, in this long-ago sanctum, it meant something deeper. It meant integration, a life braided with reading, writing, reflection, and reverence. The scholar now gestures toward a lower room.
You dux lichtly under a horseso chapit arch and descend into a cooler chamber.
The air smells faintly of turmeric and beeswax. This is where the students studied. At first glance, it looks like a simple room, mats on the ground, low wooden tables with ink stains. But look closer and you'll notice grooves in the floor. Narrow tracks carved by generations of anxious feet pacing while reciting verses, or perhaps by teachers who refused to sit still.
In one corner, a little brass bell.
Not for timekeeping, but for calling debates to a close. There's a chart scrawled on the wall in faded ink, a weekly reading ladder. Not by difficulty, but by mood. Monday is curiosity, Wednesday is discipline, Friday is forgiveness. Saturday simply says, for whatever is unfinished. You sit on a cushion, the stuffing slightly uneven beneath you, and try to imagine being a student here. Your day might begin before dawn. You'd rise with the muezzin's call and wash your hands, not just for prayer, but for page turning.
Clean hands, clean heart.
Then, barefoot and perhaps slightly grumpy, you'd shuffle into this room and recite the previous day's passage before being given a new one. And here's the twist, not everyone read the same texts. Your curriculum would be tailored, an odd blend of astrology, medicine, history, Quranic interpretation, and poetry, depending on your temperament. Shy students were often given metaphors. Restless ones got geometry. Students prone to arrogance?
Grammar. The ultimate humbler.
Historians still argue whether this pedagogical style was truly individualized or just a byproduct of chaos. But the result was a deeply personal form of learning, something between mentorship and mysticism.
The Scholar walks past a low bookshelf and plucks a narrow volume off the top.
Try this, he says, handing it to you with both hands, palms up like an offering.
It's a copybook. Blank pages on the left.
Sample calligraphy on the right. You trace your finger along a particularly elegant loop. The script isn't just beautiful, it's musical, balanced like a line of poetry you want to whisper rather than speak. You remember reading somewhere that Timbuktu's calligraphers were famous for writing with breath, their pen strokes as rhythmic as song. Some even practiced by copying verses onto watermelons before graduating to paper. Which, if nothing else, is a great excuse to snack during study sessions.
Your guide sets a thin reed pen in your hand.
Just one word, he says. You dip the nib into a dark pot of ink, mixed you're told from soot, gum arabic and fig sap, and carefully press it to the page.
The ink flows slowly, like honey reluctant to leave the spoon. You write, Timbuktu.
The letters are shaky, uneven. Your scholar chuckles. It's not the word that matters, he says. It's the stillness it requires.
A pause.
Then, most students didn't finish their first book until they had copied it 3 times.
3 times. The same book. Page by page, sentence by sentence.
Not for memorization, but for mastery of rhythm and humility. The idea was that you weren't just learning the text, you were becoming someone who could carry it. One fringe text here even claimed that a person's moral worth could be measured by the neatness of their margins.
No margin, no peace. You run your hand down the edge of the page you've just written. A generous margin.
You are, apparently, very morally upright, at least today. The scholar begins to tidy the room, returning the ink pot to its cradle, straightening the cushions, rolling the reed mat a few inches to the left. Not out of necessity, but as ritual. He hums again, that tuneless, meandering melody. You close your eyes for just a moment, and you swear the books are listening. Someone had once said that in Timbuktu, every corner of the library was blessed, with breath, with quiet, with sandalwood and ink. The air here felt filtered through parchment. A lizard scuttles along the base of the wall and pauses beside your cushion. You both sit there for a moment, kindred in stillness, united by dust and quiet observation.
When you open your eyes again, the scholar is holding the meeting new.
It's a scroll unlike the others, wrapped not in leather, but in cloth deep blue, embroidered with silver thread.
He does not open it. Not yet.
Instead, he says, this belonged to a woman named Sally, one of the few we know by name.
You sit up straighter.
He places it gently before you, not offering to unwrap it, only to tell its story. Sally, he explains, was both a copyist and a translator. Fluent in Songhai, Arabic, and Tamashek, she wrote commentaries on devotional texts and secretly included her own poems in the margins. Some were discovered centuries later, wrapped in old manuscript cloth, hidden among footnotes. She once wrote, the scholar whispers, if I cannot speak aloud, let me speak sideways, in the folds of footnotes.
You exhale slowly. The candle flickers in agreement.
And now, the day deepens into a honey-colored quiet. The cushion beneath you, the reed pen beside you, the scroll before you, they're not just objects anymore. They're thresholds. You don't quite feel like you're learning history. You feel like you're remembering it. A moment longer, breathing in the library air, a mixture of time, dust, and fig sap.
When you open your eyes again, it's dusk outside. Or perhaps just your imagination dimming the world.
Either way, the light has changed.
Warmer now.
Like the golden hour wants to join the library too. The scholar motions you toward the far end of the room where a small wooden chest rests, its corners capped in worn brass. He opens it slowly, reverently, revealing a collection of writing tools, bundled reed pens, slabs of inkstone, folded cloths, and curious little vials filled with powders, ground bark, crushed hibiscus, powdered indigo. These are the materials of the muhakkik, the copyists. Not mere scribes, but artisans of text, guardians of symmetry, tone, and annotation. You're told that in Timbuktu, a great manuscript wasn't merely legible, it was meditative. Not meant to be read quickly, but to be inhabited. Copyists here worked by candlelight, their desks sometimes no taller than their knees, with cushions molded perfectly to the contours of each body. No two seats were the same, because no two scholars bent the same way. You run a hand along one of the manuscript covers, soft goatskin etched with faint floral patterns. Inside is not a sacred text but something far more ordinary, a treatise on herbal laxatives.
Very detailed. Mildly humorous.
This one was very popular, the scholar says, not quite smiling. You chuckle and murmur something about ancient remedies.
He leans in.
Historians still argue whether that recipe for fig and rhubarb tea was actually effective, or just tasted pleasant enough to mask other symptoms. In the margins you spot little notes, too strong, add mint.
Tested on cousin.
Regret. Try with dates instead, less drama. You imagine the scribe copying that line, smirking quietly in candlelight. Beside this manuscript lies another, an almanac of star positions and rainfall records, passed down from teacher to pupil over decades. One page features a beautifully illustrated rain cloud with the caption, "It didn't come, but we drew it anyway." There's poetry in that disappointment. The scholar explains how copyists were trained not just to replicate words, but to mirror the intent of the original writer.
A sharp tone must stay sharp. A joke must still land.
And ambiguity, oh, ambiguity was gold. Margins were used liberally. Not just for notes, but for argument. A page might show a paragraph about planetary influence on harvests, while the margin reads, nonsense, but elegantly stated. Sometimes the margins argued with each other. One student's scrawl was countered years later by another's note, "You clearly never grew millet." Your guide points out one particular technique, the hashia, a marginal comment system where side notes looped like vines around the text. Some pages look like illuminated gardens, with the main body of text the central path and all around it, blossoms of inquiry, disagreement, and occasional sass. It is said that students who mastered this style of commentary were invited to copy not just books, but authors. That is, their voices, their thought styles, their hesitations and certainties. To be allowed to write in the margin of a master's work was, in a way, a graduation. You ask how they knew when a student was ready.
The scholar shrugs.
When their margin made you stop and think. He closes the chest and gently rests his hand atop it. You notice, then, a curious mark carved into its surface, a stylized bird, wings extended, eye open. You're told it's a Sahelian glyph, borrowed into scholarly tradition as a symbol of memory that moves forward and backward. The bird that watches both ends of the sentence, the scholar says.
Outside, a breze stierse trug se winduslit.
You hear a distant bell, not from the library, but from a tea vendor passing in the street below.
The call of the everyday, treading itself trug the rituals of the eternal.
You stay seated, the copybook still in your lap, its ink dry now. You can't help but think of all the hands that have written in this space, some careful, some hurried, some trembling with the effort of concentration. There's a trace of them in the fibers of the mat beneath you, in the dips of the cushions.
In the places where the candle smoke stehen the wood just slichtly darker.
You feel, in a way, welcomed. Not as a guest, but as another echo in this long chorus of quiet devotion. So you place your reed pen back where it came from, tuck your paper into the folds of the book, and nod at the scholar.
He nods back.
He doesn't speak again, because in a library like this, silence is the final punctuation mark.
The weight of the silence lingers, tick like the before a storm.
You stand, stretching gently, the weight of the manuscript still with you, like a quiet hum under your skin. Outside, the last light of the day is receding, and the air cools slightly. You follow the scholar as he leads you toward another part of the library. There's a narrow hallway, a soft curve of wooden stone, where the floor is polished by centuries of footfalls. The faintest trace of incense lingers here, sandalwood and something sweeter, perhaps the delicate bloom of jasmine or a rare desert flower. It's an aroma that seems to belong more to the past than the present, a lingering echo.
Come, he says softly.
There is something you must see. You follow, curious, but feeling as if you are slipping between worlds.
The hall narrows, and soon you come to another room, this one darker and cooler than the one you left behind.
This room smells of leather and earth, as though it holds secrets more ancient than anything you've yet encountered. The shelves here are not the bright, new ones of the main hall but are instead aged, weathered, they would darken by time. Inside, you find the remains of ancient texts, some too fragile to touch directly, others preserved behind glass or in thick wraps of cloth. But it's not the books themselves that capture your attention, it's the strange contraptions that lie nearby. The scholar points to one in particular, a large, intricate wooden box with small cranks and knobs. This, he explains, is an early version of a mechanical scribe.
You lean in closer, your curiosity piqued.
It's an odd sight, a clunky, crude thing, but undeniably ahead of its time. The device, you're told, was used by a select few scribes in Timbuktu to assist with the copying process. It was a form of early automation, though not in the way we understand it today. This was a machine built to replicate the hand movements of a scribe, moving the reed pens in a careful, deliberate motion across the paper. Historians still argue whether this contraption was ever actually used in daily practice, the scholar continues. Some say it was merely a prototype, an idea that never fully took off. Others insist it was integral to the success of some of Timbuktu's greatest libraries. You look at the machine again, its gears worn and its levers rusted, and wonder what it must have been like to sit beside it, watching as the device mirrored your own hand, creating words and images from nothing. The scholar moves toward a nearby shelf and pulls down another manuscript, this one bound in bright golden thread. The pages inside are different from those you've seen before. These are full of complex diagrams, charts of the stars, illustrations of planets, and maps of the known world at the time. The library, you learn, was not only a place of learning in the traditional sense. It was also a center for astronomical research, medicine, and mathematics. The scholar opens the manuscript and flips through the pages, revealing intricate calculations and precise drawings. These, he says with quiet pride, are not just books. They are blueprints for understanding the universe. Timbuktu, he tells you, was not just a library or a university. It was a city where scholars came from all corners of Africa, Europe, and beyond. They gathered here not just to exchange knowledge but to expand upon it, to push the boundaries of what was known, to debate and discover new ideas. You ask, somewhat hesitantly, about the people who built these collections.
Who were they, really?
Were they all elite scholars from far-off lands, or were there others, too? The scholar's eyes gleam as he leans in closer, as if sharing a secret. They were, in many ways, like the books themselves, he says softly. Scholars, yes. But also traders, merchants, travelers. People who didn't just read about the world, they moved through it. Some of the best manuscripts came from scholars who had traveled along the ancient Silk routes or across the Sahara, collecting knowledge and stories. He pauses, letting the weight of this sink in. There were also women among them. It's easy to forget, but many of the most influential scholars in Timbuktu were women, poets, mathematicians, astronomers, and doctors. They worked side by side with the men, contributing to the city's great legacy of learning. You smile softly, thinking about how, in so many ways, history has often overlooked the contributions of these women.
But not here, not in Timbuktu.
Here, their voices echo just as loudly as the men's. The scholar moves to a large wooden table, where a few other manuscripts are laid out in varying stages of completion. You notice, however, that this table is covered with strange little symbols. Tiny marks, like dots and lines, scattered across the surface of the parchment. They look like a form of writing, but not one you recognize. These, the scholar says, are examples of an early form of notation used by the scholars here. Not quite writing, not quite numbers, more of a shorthand for concepts, thoughts, or ideas that couldn't be captured by conventional writing.
You lean in, intrigued.
The scholar goes on, explaining how this form of notation was used to record thoughts on the fly, to jot down ideas too fluid or abstract to commit fully to paper. Some scholars called it thought writing, an attempt to capture the immediacy of the mind itself. Historians, the scholar adds with a wry smile, still argue whether this system was more advanced than our own modern shorthand. They say it was ahead of its time. But whether that was a blessing or a curse, we'll never truly know. You look at the dots and lines, imagining how they must have looked in motion, how quickly they would have been written, like fleeting thoughts captured in the moment before they could slip away. The scholar's voice softens, and you feel the quiet reverence of this place seeping into your own bones. There's a weight to the air now, a heaviness that's not oppressive but gentle, like the feeling of being in the presence of something sacred. This room, he says, is where the most important ideas were born. And not just the ideas that changed the world, but the ones that never made it onto paper. The ones that were too delicate to be captured, too fleeting. You nod, understanding the gravity of what he's saying. As you stand there, taking in the quiet beauty of the room, it becomes clear to you that Timbuktu was not just a place of learning. It was a place of becoming, of understanding, and of preserving the fragile nature of thought itself. And with that, you begin to feel the weight of time once again. The ancient walls of the library, the worn manuscripts, the echo of past scholars, they all seem to converge in this single moment. You're not sure how long you've been standing there, lost in the quiet, but you know that in this place, time is not something to be rushed. As the evening stretches on, you feel the air cool slightly, the soft sound of your footsteps echoing through the hallways.
You beginning to lose track of time.
The rhythmic, gentle clicking of a distant scribe's pen seems almost as though it's guiding you, pulling you further into this world of ancient knowledge and secrets. The scholar, still beside you, leads you to yet another room, a quieter, more intimate space. This room is lit by the soft glow of oil lamps, their flames dancing lightly in the cool breeze coming through a small window. It's not grand or imposing like the others, but there's something deeply inviting about it. You take in the shelves, stacked with scrolls, books, and various pieces of parchment, all haphazardly arranged, as if they've been used for quick reference and then set aside. The scholar gestures to a small table in the center of the room, where a map is spread out. It's a map of the world as known to the scholars of Timbuktu, but it's much more than a simple geographic depiction. This map is a work of art, filled with intricate details, drawings of deserts, rivers, and mountains, places that exist only in legend for most of the world. But the map's real value lies in its ability to convey not just the physical, but the intellectual landscapes of the time. Look here, the scholar says softly, pointing to a section of the map. This part of the world, where the deserts meet the sea, many believed it to be the edge of the world. You lean in closer, tracing the path of the rivers on the map with your finger, imagining how it must have felt to travel these vast distances. It's easy to forget that in this time, the world was far less connected. Travel between Africa and the Mediterranean world was perilous, and only a handful of brave souls dared to traverse the desert sands or the perilous routes across the Sahara. Historians still argue, the scholar continues, whether Timbuktu itself was ever fully discovered by outsiders. To many, it was more of a mythical city, a place that existed in stories, a legend passed from mouth to mouth. But to those who lived here, it was very real, of course. And it was their hub for learning, where they connected ideas from across Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. He points to another part of the map, and your eyes widen in surprise. You hadn't realized that the scholars here had knowledge of places so far beyond their immediate surroundings. There are small, delicate symbols marking locations in far-flung lands, vast cities you've only read about in your own history books. Much of this knowledge came through trade routes, the scholar continues. The Silk routes, the Trans-Saharan routes, Timbuktu was right at the crossroads of many ancient trade networks. It wasn't just the exchange of goods, but of knowledge, ideas, and discoveries. You pause, your mind grappling with the vastness of it all. Here you are, in a place where knowledge from the farthest corners of the earth met and mingled, where ideas were passed back and forth between continents in ways you can't quite comprehend. The sheer scope of this intellectual exchange is overwhelming in the best possible way. The scholar doesn't speak for a moment, as if he, too, is lost in thought. Then, his voice breaks the silence again, this time softer, almost as if he's sharing something personal. You know, he says, the greatest scholars of Timbuktu were not necessarily the ones with the most formal education. They were those who understood the value of learning from the world around them. The traders, the travelers, the wanderers. And the best part. His eyes gleam in the dim light. They didn't just absorb knowledge. They questioned it, they challenged it. They shaped it. The idea of shaping knowledge, rather than merely absorbing it, lingers with you. It's a way of thinking that seems almost foreign to the modern world, where information is so readily available at the touch of a button. But in this time, knowledge wasn't something to be passively consumed. It was something to be actively molded, discussed, and argued over. Every scroll, every manuscript was a dialogue between the present and the past, between the known and the unknown. The scholar begins to roll up the map, his fingers moving gently over the edges as he speaks again. Timbuktu was not a place for passive minds. It was a city for those who were constantly seeking, constantly questioning. And in that way, it was more than just a library or a university. It was a living, breathing institution of knowledge, constantly evolving, constantly challenging itself. You glance around the room, taking in the quiet atmosphere, the stillness of the night creeping in as the lamps flicker. For a moment, you almost forget where you are. This place, so far removed from the noise of the outside world, feels like a sanctuary. And then, the scholar's voice brings you back to reality, gently, like a soft breeze. There's something else you should know, he says. Timbuktu was not just a place of learning for the scholars who lived here. It was a place of knowledge for the world, a beacon of intellectual light at a time when much of the world was still in darkness. As his words sink in, you realize how much more there is to this city than the libraries or the manuscripts. It was a place that cultivated minds, that celebrated the questioning of ideas. It wasn't just a place of learning, it was a place that set the stage for future generations to think critically, to challenge assumptions, and to build upon what had come before. You start to feel the weight of this realization, the depth of it, the quiet urgency of it. And for the first time, you understand why Timbuktu has remained such a powerful symbol of knowledge and learning throughout history. It wasn't just its manuscripts or its scholars that made it famous, it was the very spirit of intellectual curiosity that it embodied.
You take a deep breath, they are now cool and crisp, and as you do, you feel a sense of calm wash over you. There is no rush here.
In this moment, in this quiet space, it's as if time itself has slowed down, inviting you to pause and reflect. The soft, rhythmic patter of distant footsteps on the stone floor marks a shift in your journey. As the scholar finishes his story, you both move through the narrow hallway, deeper into the heart of the library. The sound of your footsteps, now joined by others, echoes in the air. It's a comforting sound, a quiet reminder that even in this massive building, you are not alone. The steady light of the oil lamps flickers, casting long shadows on the walls, each one a reminder of the centuries of stories stored within these walls. You enter a larger room now, its high ceiling soaring above you, and you can't help but gasp. This room is the heart of the library, filled with towering bookshelves that stretch all the way up to the ceiling. There are ladders everywhere, leaning against the shelves, allowing the scholars to reach the higher levels where ancient scrolls and manuscripts are carefully stored. This is where the scholars of Timbuktu worked, where they pored over the great texts of their time. You notice that the books are not just written on paper, as you might have expected, but also on materials such as parchment and leather. The pages are thick and heavy, with intricate scripts filling every inch of space. The words are dense, packed with knowledge, and the way they curl and flow across the page almost seems like a dance, inviting you to follow the movement of the ink. The scholar pauses for a moment, taking in the scene with a sense of reverence. This is the real treasure of Timbuktu, he says softly. Not the gold or the precious stones that some associate with the city, but the knowledge contained in these rooms.
This is where the real world lies.
You're struck by the sense of history that surrounds you. Each scroll, each manuscript, feels like a whisper from the past. The quiet rustle of the scholars' robes as they move between the shelves adds to the atmosphere, a subtle reminder that these manuscripts were not just ancient artifacts, they were living, breathing sources of wisdom.
As you walk deeper into the room, you notice something unexpected.
Alongside the well-known works of Islamic scholars, there are also texts on astronomy, medicine, mathematics, and even the natural world. There are works that you wouldn't expect to find in a place like this, texts from distant lands, covering topics that seem completely unrelated to the traditional religious studies of the region. It's a reminder of how Timbuktu was not just a center of Islamic scholarship, but a place of intellectual exchange where ideas from all over the world mingled and influenced each other. Historians still debate how many of these manuscripts have been lost over time, the scholar says as he gestures toward the shelves. Many of them were not preserved properly during periods of turmoil. But what remains is a testament to the intellectual might of this city. As he speaks, you find your attention drifting to one of the shelves, where an ancient manuscript catches your eye. It's bound in rich leather, its edges worn and frayed. You reach out instinctively, running your fingers over the surface of the manuscript, as though it could tell you its secrets. It's difficult to imagine the centuries of history that have passed since it was first written.
The scholar notices your fascination.
That particular manuscript, he says, was written by one of the most famous scholars of Timbuktu, Ahmed Baba al-Timbukti. He wrote extensively on history, law, and theology. His works were widely regarded as some of the most important of his time. You stare at the manuscript for a moment, imagining the scholar hunched over it, carefully transcribing each word, each sentence. How much time it must have taken to complete such a work. How many generations of readers it must have had before it made its way here, to this very shelf. The scholar moves closer, his voice lowering to a soft whisper. Ahmed Baba's works were so influential that even after he was captured and taken into exile, his writings continued to inspire scholars across the Islamic world. You follow the scholar's gaze, and for a moment, it feels as though time itself has stretched back to that era, when the manuscripts of Timbuktu were the pinnacle of human knowledge. It's as if the walls themselves are whispering to you, urging you to understand the power of the written word. There was a time, the scholar continues, when the manuscripts of Timbuktu were considered to be so valuable that they were guarded fiercely. Not just by the scholars who wrote them, but by the people of the city itself. The knowledge contained within these texts was thought to hold the key to understanding not just the world around them, but the very fabric of life itself. You take a moment to process his words, and as you do, you realize the true significance of what you are witnessing. This library was not just a place for the preservation of knowledge, it was a living institution, one that had a deep impact on the intellectual development of the region and the world. In this room, the past is not just something to be studied, it's something to be experienced, to be felt. The manuscripts, the scrolls, the books, they all hold stories that span centuries. Stories of scholars, of thinkers, of travelers who passed through Timbuktu, leaving behind a legacy that would endure for generations. It's almost as if the library itself is a living entity, breathing in the knowledge of the past and exhaling it into the future. And as you stand there, surrounded by the wisdom of the ages, you can't help but feel that sense of awe that comes with witnessing something truly extraordinary. As you linger in the heart of the library, the scholar's words echo in your mind. You've stepped into a world where knowledge isn't just stored, it's revered. It's almost as though every manuscript in this room is a cherished relic, a treasure far more valuable than any jewel or gold. The quiet reverence of the scholars around you adds to this atmosphere, and you can't help but wonder, how did they manage to protect this precious collection for so long? The scholar begins to walk again, leading you through another hallway, narrower this time, and filled with more scrolls than you can count. The smell of ancient parchment mingles with the faint aroma of incense burning in the background, filling the space with a calming scent. The air is warm, the soft hum of whispers all around you as scholars pass by, heads buried in their work. It's a place where time seems to slow down, where centuries of knowledge mingle together in the quiet spaces between the pages. The history of Timbuktu isn't just about these books, the scholar explains, his voice low and thoughtful. It's also about the people who guarded them. The role of the librarians here was sacred. They were not only responsible for the preservation of knowledge, but also for the dissemination of it. You pause for a moment to let this sink in. It's hard to imagine just how much responsibility these scholars carried. It wasn't just about reading and transcribing texts, it was about protecting an entire intellectual tradition that spanned generations. Their work was a delicate balancing act, ensuring that each text was preserved for future generations, while also making sure that new ideas were allowed to flourish in the process. The scholar continues, the librarians had a responsibility to ensure that these works were shared.
But not just with anyone.
There was a hierarchy to it all. Only the most trusted scholars could access certain texts, especially those that were considered to be the most sacred or valuable. He gestures to one of the smaller rooms, where a few scholars are seated, hunched over ancient texts. That room there, for instance, is dedicated to manuscripts dealing with theology. These were the most closely guarded, and only a select few had access. They contained the core beliefs of the faith, as well as interpretations that could influence the very fabric of society. It's fascinating to think about the level of care and trust required to maintain such a collection. These scholars weren't just working in isolation, they were part of an intricate network, each person entrusted with the task of preserving not only knowledge, but the power that knowledge held. The scholar leads you into another room now, and this one is unlike the others. Instead of towering shelves filled with scrolls, the walls are lined with intricately carved wooden cabinets, each one meticulously organized. You can see that these texts are more recent, perhaps only a few centuries old, and the writing is clearer, more familiar. This is the more modern section of the library, the place where more recent works of scholarship were kept. Historians often overlook this part of the library, the scholar says with a chuckle, but this is where some of the most important work was done, especially during the medieval period, when Timbuktu became a center of Islamic learning. The scholars here contributed to the development of philosophy, astronomy, and even medicine. As you walk further into the room, you can't help but be struck by the sheer scale of the collection. There are hundreds of texts here, each one carefully catalogued, each one containing knowledge that could change the course of history. You begin to wonder, how many of these works have influenced the world in ways that are still felt today? The scholar seems to read your thoughts. These works, he says softly, were not just important for the people of Timbuktu. They spread far beyond these walls. Scholars from across Africa, the Middle East, and even Europe came here to study. This city became the intellectual hub of the region, attracting minds from all corners of the world. You can almost picture the bustling streets of Timbuktu in your mind's eye, the scholars walking through the marketplace, deep in conversation about the latest ideas, the latest discoveries. It's easy to imagine that this was a place where every street corner could have sparked a new intellectual revolution. But this intellectual energy wasn't just confined to books and scrolls, it was woven into the very fabric of the city itself, in the way people spoke, thought, and interacted with the world around them. The scholar stops walking for a moment, his gaze turning toward a nearby shelf. It's important to remember, he says quietly, that this wasn't just a library. It was a sanctuary of knowledge. A place where scholars came to escape the pressures of the world outside, and to immerse themselves in the study of the greatest texts ever written. For a moment, you stand there in silence, surrounded by the weight of centuries of intellectual achievement. The quiet hum of the library seems to resonate deeper now, as though the building itself is holding its breath, waiting for something, or perhaps someone, to rediscover the knowledge contained within these walls. You can almost feel the presence of the great minds that once walked these halls, their ideas reverberating through time. They left behind more than just books. They left behind a legacy of wisdom, a reminder that the pursuit of knowledge is timeless. It's a humbling thought, and as you stand there, surrounded by the silent stories of the past, you begin to realize that this journey isn't just about the manuscripts or the scholars of Timbuktu. It's about something much bigger, the way knowledge travels through time, how it connects us to the past, and how it shapes the future. And with that, you can't help but feel a sense of peace, knowing that in this quiet corner of the world, there are still places like this, where the wisdom of the ages is preserved and cherished, just as it was so many centuries ago. As you walk further into the heart of Timbuktu's great library, the atmosphere shifts once again. The scholar's footsteps echo softly on the stone floor, and you find yourself enveloped in the stillness, as if the very air is thick with centuries of wisdom. The faint flicker of torchlight casts long shadows along the walls, adding to the surreal, almost dreamlike quality of the space. There's a certain reverence to the quiet, the weight of history pressing in around you. You can't help but marvel at the immense treasure trove of knowledge that once flourished here. While the library was undoubtedly a repository for written texts, it also served as a hub for oral history, a place where stories, lessons, and knowledge were passed down through generations. It wasn't just about reading, the scholar continues, his voice taking on a nostalgic tone. It was about teaching, passing on what was learned, so it could be improved upon. You imagine what it would have been like to be a student in those halls, your mind full of excitement, your heart racing with the thrill of discovery. Scholars from across Africa, the Middle East and beyond would have gathered in these rooms to discuss the great ideas of the day. It's hard not to feel the magnetic pull of this intellectual energy that once swirled within the walls. But there was another, quieter element to Timbuktu's scholarly tradition. The city was known for its deeply spiritual nature, a quality that infused its intellectual pursuits. Many of the texts housed in the library were of a spiritual or religious nature, exploring the teachings of Islam and the deeper mysteries of life. These manuscripts were often illuminated with intricate designs, not merely for beauty, but to reflect the divine. The spiritual significance of these texts cannot be overstated, the scholar explains, his eyes reflecting the flicker of torchlight. They weren't just meant to be read, they were meant to inspire, to bring one closer to understanding the divine. It's almost impossible to ignore the depth of meaning in these manuscripts, especially when you see how carefully they were crafted. The pages are adorned with vibrant calligraphy, each stroke of the pen a work of art in its own right. But it wasn't just the words that were important, it was the way the words connected to a greater truth, the way they transcended mere scholarship to touch on something far more profound. You pause for a moment in front of a particularly striking manuscript, its gold leaf glinting in the dim light. The pages are filled with intricate geometric patterns, symbols that seem to dance in the flickering shadows. This one, the scholar says quietly, was used for teaching Sufism, the mystical branch of Islam. It's believed that studying the patterns and the text together would lead to a deeper understanding of the divine.
For a moment, Jure lost in the delicate beauty of the manuscript.
The intricate swirls of gold and blue are mesmerizing, and the delicate calligraphy seems to pulse with life. You almost feel as though the words are whispering to you, as though they hold secrets waiting to be unlocked. It's not just about the knowledge itself, it's about the way this knowledge was imparted. The way it was meant to touch the heart and soul of the reader, to inspire not just the intellect but the spirit. The scholars of Timbuktu understood this deeply, and it's one of the reasons their intellectual tradition has had such a lasting impact on the world. The scholar now leads you to a smaller room, one that feels more intimate than the others. The walls are lined with smaller shelves, each one filled with carefully stored manuscripts, some of which are only a few inches tall. These were the works of some of the greatest minds in Timbuktu, the scholar explains. Many of them were written by the very people who made this city a center of learning. But what makes these texts truly special is that they weren't just written for scholarly purposes, they were written to be shared with others. It's in this room that the importance of the oral tradition becomes most evident. The manuscripts here are not just academic texts. They are works meant to be read aloud, shared in small circles, and passed down to the next generation. The scholarly tradition of Timbuktu was as much about conversation as it was about contemplation. Scholars would gather in these rooms to discuss the texts, to challenge each other's interpretations, and to engage in the kind of intellectual discourse that fueled the city's intellectual vitality. The scholar leans in a little closer, his voice softening. This is why Timbuktu became such a beacon for learning. It wasn't just about collecting texts, it was about engaging with them. It was about the conversations, the debates, and the sharing of knowledge that happened within these walls. As the scholar speaks, you begin to understand just how important these discussions were. They weren't just academic exercises, they were a way of bringing people together, of creating a community of thinkers who were united by a shared love of learning. And it wasn't just scholars from Timbuktu who participated in these debates. People came from far and wide to be a part of this intellectual exchange, to engage with the great minds of the age. You can imagine the lively discussions that must have taken place in these rooms, the passionate arguments, the laughter, and the quiet moments of reflection. It's easy to see why Timbuktu became known as the city of 333 saints. A place where wisdom was not only preserved, but where it thrived. As you walk through the final hallway, the air feels heavier with the weight of centuries of intellectual history. You can feel the energy of the scholars who once walked these same corridors, their minds brimming with ideas that would change the course of history. You begin to understand that Timbuktu was more than just a city, it was a living, breathing organism, fueled by the exchange of ideas, by the sharing of knowledge, and by the profound belief that knowledge is not just a tool, but a way to connect with something far greater than oneself. And as you step out into the cool night air, you feel a deep sense of gratitude for the journey you've just experienced. You've been allowed to glimpse into a world that has been largely forgotten by time, a world where the pursuit of knowledge was not just an academic exercise, but a spiritual endeavor. It's a world that may have faded into history, but one that continues to influence the world in ways we may never fully understand. As you step outside, the night feels cooler against your skin, the desert air heavy with the scent of earth and distant winds. The city of Timbuktu is quiet, but you can feel its pulse, as though the stories of its past are still alive in the very streets you walk upon. The shadows stretch long under the moonlight, and for a moment, it feels as if you could simply drift back into the past, as though the city might open up again and invite you to explore its winding streets and hidden corners. It's easy to forget, in the quiet of the night, that Timbuktu's golden age wasn't just about the scholars and the manuscripts. The city was also a vibrant center of trade, a melting pot where cultures met and mingled, where ideas from the farthest reaches of the world were exchanged. Traders from all over Africa, the Middle East and Europe would have passed through Timbuktu, bringing with them goods like gold, salt and spices, as well as ideas, philosophies and religions. Historians still argue about the extent to which the trans-Saharan trade routes played a role in the city's intellectual development. Some suggest that it was the wealth of trade that allowed Timbuktu to flourish as a center of learning. Others argue that it was the city's unique intellectual culture that attracted traders in the first place. But regardless of which came first, there's no denying that Timbuktu was, for centuries, a crossroads of ideas and cultures.
As you walk along the edge of the city, the sounds of the marketplace still linger in your mindestens. You can almost hear the haggling of traders, the clang of metal, the shuffling of feet in the dust.
The exchange wasn't just about material goods, it was also about the exchange of knowledge, the blending of cultures, and the development of a shared understanding that transcended borders. It was a place where learning wasn't confined to the walls of the library, but lived in the air itself, where people from all walks of life could come together and share their wisdom. Timbuktu's wealth, however, was not just material. It was intellectual. The scholars who gathered here were aware of the city's unique role in the world, and they understood the importance of preserving and passing on their knowledge. Many of the manuscripts in the library were written not just as a record of knowledge, but as a way to ensure that this knowledge would survive through the generations. Some of these manuscripts were written in Arabic, but many others were in the local languages, such as Songhai and Tamashek. This bilingualism, the blending of African and Islamic intellectual traditions, was one of the hallmarks of Timbuktu's scholarly culture. It's fascinating to think about the way the city's intellectual life was a fusion of ideas from across the world, from the Islamic world to sub-Saharan Africa, and how this fusion created a unique body of knowledge that would influence generations to come. As you continue walking, the city begins to feel more and more like a place that exists only in dreams, a place where history is not just something to be studied, but something to be experienced. You can almost see the scholars as they walk these same streets, their minds filled with ideas that would shape the future. You can hear their quiet debates in the marketplaces, their discussions about philosophy, astronomy, and theology. You can feel the energy of this intellectual movement, and you begin to understand why Timbuktu was once considered one of the greatest centers of learning in the world. It's easy to imagine that the city's reputation as a center of intellectual greatness was not just about the physical libraries and manuscripts, but about the atmosphere that permeated the air. This was a place where knowledge was revered, where intellectual curiosity was not only encouraged but expected. Scholars would have spent hours poring over ancient texts, discussing them with colleagues, and debating their interpretations. This exchange of ideas, this constant push for deeper understanding, was at the heart of Timbuktu's intellectual vibrancy. But the story of Timbuktu's intellectual legacy is also a story of resilience. In the face of adversity, Timbuktu's scholars continued to write, to teach, and to preserve their knowledge. The city's intellectual life was not immune to the challenges of war, political upheaval, and the rise of colonialism. In the 16th century, when the city was invaded by Moroccan forces, many of its manuscripts were looted or destroyed. Yet, despite these losses, the intellectual spirit of Timbuktu endured. Historians still debate whether Timbuktu ever truly recovered from this period of decline. Some argue that the city never regained its former glory, while others believe that its intellectual tradition continued to influence scholars across Africa and beyond. But what is clear is that, even after centuries of hardship, Timbuktu's intellectual legacy lives on today. The manuscripts that survived the test of time, the ideas that were passed down through generations, continue to shape our understanding of history, culture, and knowledge. As you stand there, looking out over the ancient city, you realize that Timbuktu is more than just a historical site, it's a symbol of the enduring power of knowledge. It's a reminder that even in the face of hardship and adversity, the pursuit of wisdom can never be extinguished. Timbuktu may no longer be the thriving intellectual center it once was, but its legacy lives on in the hearts and minds of those who continue to study its manuscripts, to learn from its past, and to honor the intellectual traditions that made the city great. The night is still, and the desert stretches out before you, endless and mysterious. The city behind you may be quiet, but in your mind, you can still hear the echoes of the scholars who once filled its streets, still feel the energy of the intellectual movement that once called Timbuktu home. You take one last deep breath, savoring the cool night air, before continuing on your journey, forever carrying with you the memory of the great city of Timbuktu, a city where the pursuit of knowledge was not just an intellectual endeavor, but a spiritual one. The night is still thick with mystery as you continue your journey. The distant stars shimmer overhead, casting a cool glow that makes you feel as though you are drifting through time. In the soft silence, you can almost hear the distant echoes of old songs sung by travelers, or the gentle whisper of wind through the parchment of lost manuscripts. Each step feels lighter as you imagine what the streets of Timbuktu once held, voices of scholars who were not just educated in the ways of the world, but were tasked with safeguarding it. In the midst of this deep night, your mind drifts back to the way these manuscripts were more than mere books. They were treasure maps of knowledge, a map through history that pointed not to locations, but to the wisdom that would illuminate the future. Timbuktu's greatest gift was not only its famed libraries but the very idea that learning could be endless, a limitless pursuit. This was where wisdom didn't rest in books alone. It rested in every hand that passed a manuscript to another, in every conversation sparked by new ideas. Timbuktu was more than a city of books, it was a city of human connection. Historians still debate the exact number of manuscripts that once filled the city's libraries, but estimates suggest there were upwards of 700,000 manuscripts, each an extraordinary vessel of thought. They weren't just books on philosophy, astronomy, or religion. They were practical texts on medicine, agriculture, and mathematics, detailing methods that would help guide the people of West Africa through the ages. The manuscripts documented the wonders of nature, the human body, the heavens, and even the hidden powers of plants. For centuries, this knowledge was both kept and shared, illuminating minds that traveled from far and wide. The cultural exchanges that took place in Timbuktu weren't just limited to what was written. They were about the intellectual traditions brought from various parts of Africa, the Middle East, and beyond. Scholars from places like Morocco, Egypt, and even Spain traveled here to engage with this fusion of intellectual traditions. You can imagine them now, men and women in flowing robes, speaking in gentle rhythmic tones, each one contributing to the magnificent collage of knowledge that made Timbuktu thrive. Perhaps one of the most fascinating aspects of these exchanges is the shared commitment to understanding the natural world, which was seen as a divine act. At the center of all this knowledge was the Malian Empire, the power that once ruled over Timbuktu. In its prime, the Malian Empire was one of the richest and most powerful in the world. Its wealth wasn't just in gold, it was in knowledge. The famous Emperor Mansa Musa, who ruled from 1312 to 1337, is often remembered not only for his opulent pilgrimage to Mecca but for the way he spread wealth and knowledge across the empire. Mansa Musa's generosity helped fund the construction of mosques, schools, and libraries, solidifying Timbuktu's place as the intellectual heart of West Africa. Historians still marvel at how Mansa Musa's pilgrimage in 1324 left a lasting impact on the global economy. As he made his way to Mecca, the emperor reportedly distributed so much gold along the way that he caused inflation in the regions he passed through. But Mansa Musa's influence wasn't limited to his riches. He was deeply invested in making Timbuktu a cultural and intellectual center. Under his reign, the city's famous Sankore University and other learning institutions flourished. He brought scholars from across the Muslim world to teach in Timbuktu, ensuring that knowledge of astronomy, mathematics, medicine, and the sciences would be preserved and passed down for generations. While the grand libraries and intellectual life of Timbuktu thrived, there were, of course, challenges that this shining city of knowledge had to face. The threat of invasion loomed large over the city's intellectual institutions. As we discussed before, the Moroccan invasion of the 16th century had far-reaching consequences, as many of Timbuktu's treasured manuscripts were looted or destroyed. However, it's important to remember that even in the face of destruction, the intellectual spirit of Timbuktu did not die. Many manuscripts were hidden, protected by the people who valued them most. These manuscripts, passed down through generations, eventually found their way to the modern world. And so, as you continue walking through this mystical landscape, the weight of Timbuktu's intellectual legacy seems to settle around you. You can feel its presence in the air, in the way the wind shifts and the stars shine a little brighter tonight. Timbuktu wasn't just a city, it was a promise. A promise that knowledge would continue to flow, long after the gold had turned to dust and the empires had faded into history. It was the kind of place that taught its people that learning, the pursuit of knowledge, was a sacred thing, a divine calling that would not be forgotten, no matter the challenges it faced. Your steps feel as though they are taking you deeper into the past now, back to a time when Timbuktu was a bustling hub of scholars and traders. You can almost imagine yourself walking among them, listening to the lectures that filled the air with ideas and dreams. The city, though no longer the center it once was, continues to live on in the hearts of those who carry its legacy. It's remarkable to think that, in a world filled with distractions, Timbuktu's focus on the pursuit of knowledge has a timeless relevance. You could almost hear the scholars discussing the same questions that we still ask today, about the nature of the universe, the mysteries of the human body, the origins of the stars. These are the same questions that drive us now, as they did centuries ago, and that timeless pursuit of understanding, that unyielding desire to learn, is the greatest gift that Timbuktu has left for the world. As you continue to walk, your pace slows even further, the quiet of the desert surrounding you.
You take a deep breath, letting the cool night air fill your lungs, and for a moment, you feel at peace.
The journey is long, but the weight of Timbuktu's legacy is light. You carry it with you gently, knowing that its knowledge has traveled far and wide, far beyond these desert sands, reaching all corners of the earth. Timbuktu, in its wisdom, has shown that no matter how far we travel, no matter how much time passes, the pursuit of knowledge is eternal. The night seems to grow deeper, as though you've crossed into another realm. With each step, the sounds of the world around you fade, until in the distance, the faint murmur of ancient voices begins to rise. You can hear the rustling of pages, the soft shuffle of feet on dust-laden floors. The scholars of Timbuktu are here, their voices intertwined in quiet debate. What you're hearing now, however, is not an echo of the past, but rather the continuation of a legacy. Timbuktu's libraries were, above all, places of collaboration. A scholar did not study in isolation. Rather, knowledge was something to be shared and built upon. You can picture the rooms now, with their walls lined with shelves laden with manuscripts. The scent of old paper and ink fills the air. In the center of the room, scholars and students alike sit cross-legged, discussing everything from the stars above to the earth beneath their feet. The air is thick with the hum of discovery. But it wasn't just the books that made Timbuktu special, it was the philosophy that knowledge should be accessible to everyone. Historians have long debated whether Timbuktu was as open to women's scholarship as it was to men's. Some argue that women were rarely seen among the ranks of prominent scholars, while others point to strong evidence that women played a key role in preserving knowledge. Scholars suggest that many of the city's most famous manuscripts were preserved by women, whether by copying them, teaching from them, or safeguarding them during times of crisis. For these women, their role wasn't just one of education, it was one of stewardship, ensuring that the flame of knowledge would never be extinguished. You can imagine them now, sitting together in quiet conversation, discussing the subtleties of Arabic poetry, the complex geometry of Islamic architecture, or the delicate art of herbal medicine. These women were not just passive recipients of knowledge, they were creators, innovators, and protectors. Historians still argue about the true extent of women's involvement in the scholarly life of Timbuktu, but what is clear is that their influence cannot be overlooked. As the night deepens further, you begin to reflect on how knowledge in Timbuktu wasn't just confined to the academic elite. The manuscripts weren't locked away in some ivory tower. Instead, they were shared with merchants, travelers, and farmers alike. You might even picture a merchant stopping by a library after a long journey, eager to learn new techniques to improve his business. Or perhaps a farmer, curious about the latest advances in irrigation, seeking wisdom from the city's vast collection of agricultural texts. Timbuktu was a place where learning wasn't just for the privileged, it was for everyone who sought it. This open exchange of ideas made the city's libraries vibrant centers of intellectual life. And it was this spirit of intellectual generosity that allowed Timbuktu to continue flourishing for centuries. Knowledge in this city was never a commodity to be hoarded, it was a gift to be shared. In fact, the tradition of knowledge sharing extended beyond the walls of the libraries. It was woven into the very fabric of life in Timbuktu. Scholars didn't just teach in lecture halls, they taught in the streets, in the marketplaces, and even in the courtyards of private homes. And yet, despite all the success of this intellectual ecosystem, there were still challenges. Timbuktu's great wealth and knowledge made it a target. Other empires, hungry for the riches that the city possessed, sought to plunder its libraries and archives. The city's protection was left largely to the scholars themselves, who worked tirelessly to protect their precious manuscripts. Some stories recount how the scholars went to extraordinary lengths to safeguard their works, even hiding them in caves or burying them beneath the earth, keeping them safe from invading forces. The greatest threat to Timbuktu's libraries, however, came not from foreign invaders, but from time itself. As the centuries passed, the physical structures that housed the manuscripts began to decay. The precious parchment, inked by hand over generations, slowly crumbled. The city's libraries, once full of life and activity, began to fall into disrepair. Historians still argue about when Timbuktu's libraries truly began to decline, but the damage was undeniable. Despite the city's once great wealth, the manuscripts began to deteriorate, and many were lost forever. Yet, as we've seen, Timbuktu's intellectual legacy did not fade completely. Many of the city's manuscripts were preserved in private collections, kept hidden away for safekeeping. Others were eventually rediscovered in the 20th century, when a new generation of scholars and historians set out to recover the lost knowledge of the past. Even now, the manuscripts of Timbuktu continue to be studied and preserved, shedding light on a time and place that so many had forgotten. As you continue your journey, you find yourself thinking about the resilience of knowledge, the way it has endured through so many obstacles, from war to natural decay. It's almost as though knowledge, once written down, takes on a life of its own, continuing to survive long after the hands that wrote it have turned to dust. Timbuktu, in a way, is a testament to the idea that knowledge is eternal, that even the most fragile of manuscripts can outlast the challenges of time.
The night is beginning to fade now, and the first hints of dawn creep over the horizon. You feel the air cooler around you, the soft whisper of a new day approaching.
But even as the world begins to wake, you know that the spirit of Timbuktu, with all its wisdom and knowledge, will never truly disappear. It lives on in the hearts of those who continue to seek understanding, in the minds of scholars who follow in the footsteps of the great thinkers of the past. The day is beginning to take shape now, the first slivers of sunlight stretching lazily across the horizon. The quietude of the night is slowly giving way to the soft stirrings of morning, and as the city of Timbuktu starts to wake, a new chapter in its story is unfolding. This chapter, however, is one of revival and rediscovery, of a city's legacy that, despite the ravages of time, refuses to remain forgotten. Timbuktu's manuscripts, tucked away in private homes, secret collections, and hidden corners of the city, have begun to emerge once more. Like fragments of a long-lost puzzle, these pieces of history are being painstakingly reconstructed, each one providing new insights into the rich intellectual culture of the city. Historians still argue over how many manuscripts remain hidden. Some believe there are still vast caches waiting to be uncovered, while others think we may have already lost the most precious works. Regardless, the manuscripts that have surfaced are a treasure trove of knowledge, offering a glimpse into a past that is both foreign and familiar. In some ways, the revival of Timbuktu's intellectual life is a modern-day reflection of the city's original ethos, one of knowledge-sharing, collaboration, and open exchange. But this revival is not without its challenges. The manuscripts, though revered, are fragile. They are made from materials that, with the passage of time, have grown brittle and susceptible to damage. The task of preserving these invaluable works has become a race against time itself. You can imagine, in the quiet of a conservation room, the gentle touch of a scholar's hands as they work to restore these ancient texts. The delicate process involves cleaning the manuscripts, repairing torn pages, and even rebinding them, meticulously ensuring that each one is preserved for future generations. The work is painstaking, and the hours are long, but the scholars know that this is a crucial mission. If they do not act now, Timbuktu's legacy may slip further away, lost to the ever-encroaching tide of time. Some scholars have taken their work even further, traveling to remote corners of the world to share the manuscripts of Timbuktu with the broader academic community. These documents, once tucked away in the heart of the Sahara, are now being digitized, photographed, and cataloged for wider access. The idea of digitizing these manuscripts, allowing them to be shared with scholars across the globe, seems to capture the essence of Timbuktu itself. Knowledge meant to be shared, to be passed along, to inspire future generations. Yet, even as Timbuktu's manuscripts begin to resurface, there are reminders of the fragility of knowledge itself. Some of the most significant manuscripts have been lost forever, either due to the passage of time or the ravages of war. The city's libraries were once a place of sanctuary, where scholars could preserve their works for future generations. But, as with so many great cities, the challenges of war and conquest have left their mark. The libraries, once thriving centers of learning, were ravaged by invaders who sought to erase the city's intellectual heritage. In these instances, the manuscripts that had survived for centuries were torn apart, burned, or scattered to the winds. This destruction, though painful to consider, is a part of Timbuktu's story. It is a reminder that knowledge is not invulnerable, that even the most carefully preserved texts can be lost in an instant. And yet, despite this loss, the spirit of Timbuktu's intellectual culture endures. The manuscripts that remain are a testament to the resilience of human curiosity, the drive to understand and explain the world, no matter the obstacles. Now, as you drift deeper into this journey through time, the city of Timbuktu stands before you not as a relic of the past, but as a symbol of perseverance. The manuscripts, once thought to be lost, have found new life in the hands of those who continue to seek the knowledge they contain. You can almost hear the rustling of the pages, the soft sound of ink being applied to parchment as scholars continue their work. The legacy of Timbuktu is not a fragile one. It is a living, breathing entity, one that refuses to be silenced by the ravages of time or the forces of destruction. The manuscripts of Timbuktu, much like the city itself, are symbols of survival, of rebirth. As the world changes around them, they remain steadfast, offering their wisdom to those who are willing to listen. They have survived centuries of turmoil, and now, in this quiet moment, they are ready to be shared once more with the world. As you near the end of this journey, you can feel the weight of the knowledge that has been passed down through the ages. The scholars of Timbuktu, with their wisdom and perseverance, have left behind a legacy that will continue to echo through time. It is a legacy that invites all who seek knowledge to come closer, to listen, and to learn. The manuscripts of Timbuktu are not just relics. They are beacons, shining a light on the importance of preserving knowledge, of sharing it with others, and of ensuring that the intellectual legacy of the past lives on. As the first light of morning brightens the world around you, you are left with a sense of peace, a quiet, reassuring thought that the knowledge of the past is never truly lost. It lives on in the hearts and minds of those who continue to seek it, just as it has for centuries in the city of Timbuktu. Now, as the sun climbs higher in the sky, the legacy of Timbuktu seems to settle over you like a soft, comforting blanket. The journey through the city, a place of knowledge and culture, has been long, but as you reflect on it, you begin to see its enduring beauty and wisdom. Timbuktu is not just a city, it's a symbol of human persistence, of the will to preserve and share knowledge across generations. The manuscripts that survived the ravages of time, war, and neglect stand as quiet witnesses to an age when learning was not just a pursuit but a lifestyle. They remind us that, even in the most trying of circumstances, people have always found ways to connect, to learn, and to share. The scholars of Timbuktu, the custodians of knowledge, did not simply write down their thoughts. They wove a tapestry of understanding, one that was meant to transcend borders and time itself. You may be wondering as you sit here, just how much more there is to discover. After all, while many of the great manuscripts of Timbuktu have been rediscovered, there are likely countless others still hidden in the dust of forgotten libraries or tucked away in the secret corners of the Sahara. Some scholars believe that there is still an untapped wealth of knowledge waiting to be unearthed, and who knows, perhaps you'll be the one to unlock it someday. But for now, as you begin to relax into the rhythms of sleep, there's comfort in knowing that much of what has been uncovered will endure. In the years ahead, perhaps there will be new discoveries, more manuscripts, more insights into the city's incredible intellectual life. Historians and scholars will continue to pore over the pages, decoding the wisdom hidden within each one. The legacy of Timbuktu will persist, carried by those who understand its value and the importance of safeguarding knowledge for future generations. As you imagine the city now, long past its peak but forever etched in history, the image of its libraries, its scholars, and its vibrant intellectual life lingers. Picture the dust of the desert, the heat of the sun, and the cool shadow of the great buildings where scholars once gathered to study. Hear the rustling of ancient manuscripts, their pages turning softly in the wind. There is peace in this imagery, a sense of quiet endurance that fills you with calm. The preservation of knowledge is not simply the work of scholars or historians, it is a task that belongs to all of us. Timbuktu's legacy teaches us that knowledge is a shared treasure, meant to be passed along, cherished, and protected. Whether it is in the pages of ancient manuscripts or in the stories passed down through generations, knowledge must always be preserved, nurtured, and shared. This quiet duty rests on all who understand the value of learning, the importance of culture, and the precious nature of history. As your thoughts drift toward sleep, remember the scholars who painstakingly restored the manuscripts of Timbuktu, their hands carefully mending the delicate pages. Remember the city itself, its libraries, its universities, its scholars who once looked out at the desert landscape with the same wonder and curiosity you feel now. Their legacy is yours to carry forward, as you rest, secure in the knowledge that their wisdom is still with us, waiting to be uncovered again and again.
Now, the quietude of the night deepens, and with it, a sense of calm settles over you.
The ancient city of Timbuktu rests not in the past, but in the present moment, a quiet whisper of wisdom and knowledge that will never truly fade. As the sun begins to set, you too begin to rest, lulled by the soft, rhythmic breathing of the world around you. The journey is over for now, but the wisdom of Timbuktu will live on in your dreams.